I'm James Allen Nelson, PI. No, not a private investigator, a public intellectual. What's a public intellectual, you ask? We'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to talk about public scholarship, what it is, and why we should do it. Public scholarship has been around for years, and it's important to note that it's scholarship. It's done by scholars. It requires academic rigor to it. But for years, it didn't get the recognition it deserved. It wasn't seen as important as pure academic scholarship. It was something done outside the walls of academia. And sometimes people partnered with others who were not in and of themselves academics. And so it wasn't getting the recognition. But that began to change in the early part of this century. There was a demand by faculty and others that public scholarship should receive the same credit as any academic scholarship. The reports, the journal articles, the books written about it were still peer-reviewed, still had references, and a lot of research was done to provide the information. It brought information and new knowledge to the university. To get it recognized, they had to define what it was and what it wasn't. Some people always felt that it was really less because they conflated public scholarship with public service. And they're two totally different things. In the spring of 2006, Lakshman Yapa wrote a journal article in which he stated that student activities such as voter registration, tutoring children, volunteering in hospitals and prisons, commendable as they are, do not constitute public scholarship unless they involve active thinking, reflection, and engagement with relevant theory. Service learning is often conflated with public scholarship, but they are distinct. It's two different things. Public scholarships brings things back to the university. He went on to define what some of the attributes are. He said it addresses an issue of public interest. Knowledge is generated in the community as well as in the university. Agents producing knowledge include community residents as well as teachers and students. It integrates research, teaching, and service. It generates new knowledge through reflection and engagement with social theory. The beneficiaries of new knowledge include the university as well as the community. Some universities and colleges set up centers or other programs that had names with them that included like community engagement or outreach or civic engagement. One such is Carrollton College. You can go on their website, the Center for Community and Civic Engagement, and find out what they think about it. Here at GSU, the English department posted their view of what public scholarship is. If you go on english.gsu.edu and look it up, you can find a report on public scholarship, which states in part that some of the things scholars do are working in and with museums and other cultural organizations and institutions, writing and compiling institutional and other histories, establishing a media presence, engaging in activism and political cultural advocacy, making documentaries, consulting and providing expert testimony on public policy and cultural matters, undertaking cultural and historic preservation and resource management, archival administration and creation of public bibliographies and databases, preparing students for alternate academic careers. It mentioned in there historic preservation. The neighborhood I live in, Northcrest neighborhood in Northeast Atlanta, right at I-85 and 85, is a mid-century modern neighborhood that's been around for over 50 years. It was started being built in the 1950s, built in the 50s and 60s. And the residents wanted to get recognition as a historic neighborhood, but they didn't know how to do it. One of our neighbors has a master's degree in historic preservation. She contacted Dr. Richard Laub here at GSU. He is the director of Heritage Preservation's master's degree program in the Department of History. And every year he takes one of his classes and they do a project. In 2016, our neighborhood was their project. They came into the neighborhood, interviewed people. They did research on the neighborhood, collected as much data as they could, cataloged all 595 houses. How many of them were still mid-century modern houses and qualified? How many of them were at least 50 years old? They filled out all the paperwork you have to do and file with the Department of the interiors and to become listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. And in 2017, we were listed on that registry. Now, they produced a 3-inch notebook filled with all the documentation that was required and all the supporting materials they had to collect. But nobody was going to read that. But I read it. I went through it, and then I wrote an article for our newsletter, the Northcrest News, which I was the editor of and still am, on the neighborhood becoming a historic neighborhood. That makes me a public intellectual. Who'd have thought? Because public intellectuals are in part people that take academic work, scholarly work, and make it accessible to the public. Sometimes that might be a journalist or somebody else who's just trying to make something accessible to the public, because these are people that know their public. That's important. You also have to be able to speak the language of the people. That's part of knowing the public. And you have to talk with passion. You have to talk to people about things they're interested in. For years, public scholarship has been around. I mean, you can go back to the beginning. I mean, Socrates, Plato, Cicero, all those people were public intellectuals. They talked to the people. Hume was a public intellectual. He couldn't get into the university. He was an alternate academic, if you will. And Hume in 1739 said that reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions. That we can't make an argument that's just reason-based. We have to appeal to people's emotions, and that motivates the reasoning. A couple years earlier, Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travel fame, wrote in a small book, reasoning will never make a man correct an ill opinion, which by reasoning he never acquired. You can't reason people out of something that's illogical. You have to appeal to their emotions. And public intellectuals do that. Unfortunately, over the years, the intellectual part of public intellectuals, they're not always as intellectual as they used to be. In 1993, Edward Said was asked by the BBC to do the Reich Lectures, and those were compiled in a book called The Representations of Intellectuals. He quotes Julian Benda in the opening of his book, who talks about what real intellectuals used to be. Benda wrote the book, The Treason of Intellectuals. He said that real intellectuals are never more themselves than when moved by medical physical passion and disinterested principles of justice and truth, they denounce corruption, defend the weak, defy imperfect or oppressive authority. He sees the intellectual as someone able to speak the truth to power, a crusty, eloquent, fantastically courageous and angry individual for whom no worldly power is too big and imposing to be criticized and pointedly taken to task. A more recent book criticizing current-day public intellectuals is done by Richard Posner. It's called Public Intellectuals, A Study of Decline. Posner had a lot to say about it, but he said that today's intellectuals typically is a safe specialist who is not the type of person well suited to play the public's intellectual's most distinctive, though not only, role, that of a critical commentator addressing a non-specialist audience on matters of broad public concern. In another book by Daniel Dresner, The Ideas Industry, he changes from public intellectuals. He said these are really just thought leaders. And he defines thought leaders tend to become cheerleaders for a single game-changing idea. A lot of other people talk about how public intellectuals today have sold out. They're more interested in dollars and numbers and the number of likes and the number of hits and the number of followers than they are in truth. And they'll sell out to the highest bidder, much as sophists of ancient Greece. Sayed in his book said for him the central fact is that the role has an edge to it and cannot be played without a sense of being someone whose place it is publicly to raise embarrassing questions to confront orthodoxy and dogma, to speak truth to power. That's important. We have to know our public. Whether you're going to be a public scholar, do public scholarship, or be a public intellectual, you have to know your public. And if you're someone who has that ability to reach out, then you need to do it. But there's still people out there that are doing the right work. If you want to know about history, you can read John Meacham. He's done several books on American presidents. If you want to know about economics, Paul Krugman's written several books on economics. You want to know about critical race theory? Don't listen to politicians or the media. Read Critical Race Theory, an introduction written by the people who helped develop critical race theory in the first place. You want to know how not to be a racist? Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Those books are still out there. But today, a lot of people that are called public intellectuals seem to be somewhat less. There's a book out by scholars, Taking a Stand, Contemporary U.S. Stand-Up Comedians as Public Intellectuals. But these are people who mainly play to their audience. They play to their preconceived ideas and feed into the stereotypes they already have. It kind of reminds me of the first century writers understood this. In 2 Peter in the Bible, when we read, "For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desires, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander away to myths." If you're an intellectual, if truth is important to you, if you know how to use emotions and passions to reach people, to get them to start thinking reasonably, to touch them where their pain is and where it hurts, and to move them in the right direction, I would encourage you to do that. To get involved, whether it's in public scholarship or being a public intellectual, to do what you can, to become a crusty, eloquent, fantastically courageous and angry individual for whom no worldly power is too big and imposing to be criticized and pointedly taken to task. If you can do it, do it. If you have any questions or any comments, you can just email me at jnelson.82@student.gsu.edu.